Welcome back to The Gaze. I'm Henry Keane and this is my show, Talk for More. I'm happy to meet you on the digital platform of A New Europe, a space where we usually find and highlight all of the most significant events in the region for you, and we'll talk about it with the best of experts. First thing to talk about today is awfully obvious. It is the biggest man-made disaster of 2023 and this decade, and possibly even of the entire 21st century, the blast of the Kakhovska power plant dam. Today we will talk about all the consequences, causes and reaction of the world to this catastrophe. I am happy to introduce our guest today. It is Natalia Gozak, the project coordinator for Wildlife Fund Ukraine. Ukraine Analytica. Hello, Natalia.
Hello. Unfortunately, I'm not working for Wildlife Fund anymore, and I'm working for IFAR, International Fund for Animal Welfare.
International Wildlife Animal Welfare. Excuse me for that, but you were working for WF, did you?
Yes, definitely. I had such experience years ago. I'm
about to give you the questions on the awfully important theme about what happened in Kakhovka. So this theme is an absolute awful and absolute important for the whole planet, because as far as I can see, what's happening here in Ukraine, the international organizations are absolutely not prepared. They just sit and watch. They're, like giving a warm blanket in a week after what happened. So I'm hoping very much that your expertise will help us to go through all the intricacies of this terrible event. So let's start with what is known at the moment about this terrorist act. Well, first and foremost, it is nothing but a terrorist act. Secondly, it has been done by Russian occupiers. On the morning of June 6th, they detonated explosives planted in the dam of Kakhovska hydroelectric power plant. As a result, huge areas, that is more than 80 settlements and villages in some districts of Kherson in particular, were literally flooded, washed away, or damaged severely. And areas damaged the most are those at the low-lying left bank of Dnipro, which is Ukrainian territory under Russian occupation.
Last fall, we had information that the occupiers had mined the dam of the Kakhovka hydroelectric power plant. They did it intentionally. First, to blackmail the world. Second, to blow up the dam and use the flood as a weapon. This is exactly what happened. The flood zone includes areas where more than 100,000 people lived before the war. Now, at least tens of thousands of people remain there. The Kakhovka reservoir provided drinking water to a huge part of Ukraine, cities and villages with hundreds of thousands of people. It also supplied water to farmers for agricultural production in the south and center of Ukraine. Moreover, the destruction of the dam and the reservoir is a man-made strike on the environment, after which nature will have to recover for decades.
The motives are clear and transparent as daylight. With this brutal act, Russia was desperately trying to defend previously occupied Ukrainian territories from our counteroffensive, the upcoming counteroffensive. Like they might say, it was whatever they say it was. First, Kremlin's hasty version was that the dam was too old. Then in hours, they came up with another idea, that it was a Ukrainian special military operation, kind of a bit way too suicidal, if you ask me. But suicidal looks just fine for the Kremlin, so they say we did it. In a couple of hours, they're coming up with another version of the Kremlin's augmented reality. The dam has been destroyed during an air raid and the upcoming shellings. I mean, the dam was built after World War II and has a very solid construction safety margin. It was built specifically so that nothing happens to it during the air raids, and nothing happened to it until Russians came and blew it all up, blaming, as usual, everyone else, like nature. My question to you, all these absurd things and the versions that Kremlin is coming up to, could it be the reason that the primary agenda of the war, the battlefield, is somehow switched to a secondary agenda, that these Kremlinites are just fighting for power, struggling under the carpets for the power, and they really don't care what is going on the battlefield? Could that be the case?
Absolutely. I really cannot comment the political part of this story and the decision made, especially by Russians, which are far from usual and normal logic. That's why I would rather talk more about environmental impacts and results of what's happening. But when we talk about the reasons of this really unbelievable crime, that's really hard to understand the logic behind.
Talking about the terrible consequences, about the on the nature and the impact on the... Let's leave the political thing behind it. Let's talk about the unbelievable, disasterful impact on the nature and people. What's to expect? Because it's coming on. We really don't know what the impact is doing.
Yeah, that's true. The impact is definitely enormous, and moreover, we cannot evaluate what the impact is now. And still, as we hear everywhere about environmental crime and environmental catastrophe, I would rather call it social and human catastrophe, because comparing the impacts on people's life, infrastructure, and future of the community also in the south of Ukraine. All these comparing to the impact of nature, even though it's really dramatic, but the nature will be restored in months, years, decades, but it will be restored. While life of people is definitely civil people impacted so much that we should say that, starting from migration of population from that region and to loss of lives in future, that's all what should be expected now. When coming back to actually environmental component, and it's still environment covers different sectors, starting from the energy security, food security of Ukraine and region. All that is impacted now, and the results could be more precisely evaluated, I think, after the water will go down. We will see the destructions on the fields, on the site. And still, I'm absolutely sure that even next year, the agricultural season in the southern oblast of Ukraine would be very, very different, and most probably will not be effective anymore.
In terms of one of the biggest issues at the moment, as far as I see, the fresh water, it looks like, I understand, the wells are could be polluted, and it's simply impossible to get fresh water there. What people are left with, what options they are left to, what they're going to do. And we can't help them, obviously, because the Russians are doing everything to not allow us to turn this ecocide to mold ecocide and genocide together. This is literally what the Kremlin is doing right now. How can we be of help?
So if we look at the territories below the dam, which are now heavily flooded, definitely this polluted and dirty water also entering wells which are used by people as in the rural areas as water sources. And now this river water is there, so it's clear that as soon as the water will go down, these wells cannot be used as a safe drinking water source. The alternative is the other water supply with the water which is to be brought from other areas. And until there is analysis are done for these wells, for water sources, stating that they are already clean and safe. Local people cannot use this water for drinking. But I should maybe mention a bit broader picture, because we are talking not only about the drinking water. That's just a small part of the story. If we look we should definitely look separately upstream and downstream the dam. So now more people are looking downstream because the catastrophe now is there, and huge areas, and I've seen calculations that the ecosystems and areas are affected around 4,000 square kilometers just below the dam. And all these areas have infrastructure destroyed, but also the ecosystems and nature and animals, all this is affected. The good news that the water will go down, and already I've heard that the top levels are already reached, so it will be already going down next 2 days maybe, or week, and people will have a possibility to come back to those houses which are not totally ruined, but still definitely a lot of work to be done. But a part of this infrastructure part, we have a pollution part, because when this huge amount of water was going down, it brought the pollutants like the oils and fuels from hydropower station itself. Then there is information about petrol stations being flooded, so these fuel are also in the water at some areas, or could be in the water. Plus, agricultural chemical storage houses are also flooded, so all the chemicals has all chances to be in that water. And not talking about sewage waters, water cleaning stations, all this is destroyed. So most probably this water brings not just soil or sand, but also all these chemicals interacting with drinking water sources, with ecosystems, and then finding their way to Black Sea. And I'm pretty sure that it will be years until this impact will disappear or will be minimized. So this impact on marine areas, from plankton to the dolphins and other big mammals, still to be evaluated.
Well, exactly, that's what I meant. We really don't know what is the scale of destruction at the moment. I wanted to ask a short question, like, are there any instructions, like, the rules of conduct, what people can do so not to get infected with all sorts of diseases, you name it, it could be anything. But I think that there are none. I mean, they can't do anything. They just need to find a different source of fresh water at the moment. That's it. What can be done? Because they're literally like the whole village is just washed away.
Absolutely.
So what can you do? You save yourself.
People have to evacuate.
Yeah. After Russian occupying forces are driven away, a state enterprise, Ukhrhydroenergo, are to build a new power station on the site of a destroyed Kakhovska Dam. They say it will be built fast. This was stated by the Ukhrhydroenergo Director General Igor Sirota on air during the telethon. According to Mr. Sirota, the company has initiated discussions amongst professionals, engineers and construction specialists on how to block the destroyed dam ASAP. Of course, it happens only after the territory is deoccupied. Experts are also discussing measures to be taken in order to renew water supply from the upper reservoirs of the Dnipro cascade to provide areas that will suffer from water shortages. We talk about 3 or even 4 regions here of the country. Most probably, new wells in the Kherson and Mykolaiv regions will be drilled to obtain fresh water. Water supply from the Dnipro cascade would also be diverted to Kryvyi Rih. Ukhrhydroenergo has also submitted a new water-saving plan to the Ministry of Energy of Ukraine. Obviously, it is planned to reduce the usage of fresh water in the enterprise's own facilities. We will save water so that when it is necessary to fill the reservoir Kakhov, we will be able to do so in no time so as to provide water to affected regions, says Mr. Sirota. Clarified, he also says that these decisions were made at the meetings of the National Security Council and the State Commission of Technogenic and Environmental Safety and Emergency Situation, which took place on the day of the disaster. Reconstruction of the Kakhovska power plant will last for 5 years. and this is a question to you, and will cost Ukraine a mind-boggling money, more than $1 billion. Do you think, as a professional, that the game worth it? Do we need to rebuild it? In terms of ecology as a science, should we be really building that costly and vast structure? Is it good for ecology, or is it bad to have it back, rebuild?
I'm absolutely sure that this is a bad idea. I don't think that this huge Soviet time construction, which ruined the ecosystem of the lower Dnieper, should be brought back. This ruination definitely is a catastrophe and definitely impacting people. But as it's already happened, the future rebuilding of this dam should be definitely considered very carefully. I would say that for river itself, for healthy ecosystem, free-flowing river is definitely a plus. There is international discussions with leading scientists in environmental sciences, in ecology, in hydrology, that as soon as we have a free-flowing rivers, they provide much more ecosystem services to the environment than the blocked reservoir. Definitely, this construction was done for the sake of humans, because it was definitely useful and convenient for people to have
pardon me for interrupting.
water.
This was my next question. I mean, the reservoirs we're using for irrigation, and if you say that we do not need to rebuild it, what's now? I'm not asking what is now. It's ruined now, but do we have to rebuild it? And then when we have the other source, then we might just shut it down. Because what to do with the regions that need irrigation, and they will need it?
Yes, this is a really good question, but the situation is that we have climate change as well. And all climate modeling shows that south and east of Ukraine will be lacking water and will be water deficient more and more in the coming years. It means that raising temperatures, less water coming with precipitation, with rains, will bring the river less filled with water. The channels, as they are constructed now within Soviet times, these open, super unaffected channels cannot be supported anymore like this. If I'm not mistaken, about 1/3 of water in our irrigation system was lost or during the exploitation. So it's a super not effective system. And now, if this is the ruination we have, it's definitely worth spending 10 times less funds and not to rebuild this huge construction, but rather to identify the areas where reconstruction of the irrigation makes sense, and to do it, but have a new approach, modern technologies, drip irrigation solutions, not these huge just lines, channels of water being evaporated and going into the neighboring areas not effectively, in such not effective way. These investments would be definitely more future smart, considering the climate change. Other territories, I'm pretty sure, should be considered for pastures. As soon as now, the areas in the south and east of Ukraine still could sustain the vegetation like steppe areas. These steppe grasses could be brought back used.
I'm sorry, I read you. You're very passionate and emotional about it, and this is good when a scientist does his thing, your thing. But what about Crimea at the moment? I mean, we don't have the sources of waters for these people at the moment. Until you're talking about very good, very nice things like let's invest in this high-tech technologies. I agree with you. Like every cloud has a silver lining, and let's use the bad disaster to make a future smart decisions. But what about these people right now? They like in Crimea, in an occupied territory of Ukraine. What are we going to tell them? That we wait for another 5 or 10 years until we just invest in a very tech smart project?
They were living without the channel of Dnipro water for 7-8 years. And what it meant for them? It meant that the agriculture and industry was limited in the northern areas of Crimea. For drinking purposes, if we exclude military bases, military facilities, and heavy industry from Crimea, this water would be absolutely enough. The agriculture was actually developed by the local Tatar people for centuries before, and they were not relying on the channel built in the Soviet times, right? So again, coming back to pastures and grazing animals and agriculture types, that's the way which could be used and not copying the Soviet solutions.
Yeah, absolutely,
I'm absolutely sure that
I'm with you. I'm at your side. All I want to add to it is that if we don't have the source to deliver to people fresh water and to irrigate the pastures and to help farmers to live, literally to survive, because this is the question of survival at the moment, not even the economical one. We will also learn all the economical difficulties afterwards, this terrible lesson. But what I wanted to say is that we have to be really careful about the decisions. So maybe there is a reason to rebuild it and then invest even in this new project simultaneously, to do it both ways. Maybe. So you, as an expert, absolutely oppose the idea of rebuilding the dam?
Yes, because rebuilding itself is huge resources. That's absolutely huge funds to be streamlined there. These funds would be definitely, I'm not an economist to have the evaluations, but pretty sure that they could be used for this renovation of agriculture, communities, alternative water supplies, and in the same time saving the ecosystem of the river, which will be more stable in the long term. So rebuilding the dam will bring us back in history, but investing into the climate-smart solutions will bring us further. I don't think that these unimaginable losses and price which Ukraine is paying for having our territory back from the occupants, this price could be, we just could come back to the history back.
Yeah, exactly. Well,
that it wasn't vain. We definitely should think forward.
Okay, it's very nice that the scientists like you will actually having their voice. I want your voice to be heard. This is why I ask these questions, because I might be even over emotional about what happened. Okay, so at State's Special Transport Service, press office reports the locals in Kakhovka and the immediate vicinity are urged to be careful due to the fact that there may be enemy mines carried away by the water in the flooded areas. In this regard, the service urges local residents to be especially careful as most of the mine barriers are located in the flooding zone. You might not be a great expert in mines and explosives, but please tell us what you know on the matter. Obviously, water really can wash away and relocate that much of landmines. Have you ever experienced something like that? Have you ever seen mines washed away by a flood?
Definitely, I'm not an expert in this area, and what I see and what I hear from other scientists and experts, that the mined areas after such a huge flood definitely resulted in relocation of mines downstream. And moreover, the sediments, the soil which the water brings with itself covers those mines. So they would be not only relocated and placed in the unknown areas, but also hidden. And what I've heard is that still, maybe a few years ago, the mines from the Second World War were found in the delta of Danube River, being flushed from somewhere upstream.
All right, what else this water, the flood, can bring us definitely not a very good thing, but what it can be. Can you just as an expert, assume what it can be? Not only mines.
Yeah, as already mentioned, I think the biggest impact is with these industrial pollutions, which now are getting into the water with ruining the infrastructure. So it's not the problem is not with the water itself so much, or with the sediments, sand or soil which water brings with itself, but with these chemicals, with fuel, with oils, with sewage, infected waters, with agricultural chemicals. I've read actually the overviews that most probably bringing so much nitrogen and phosphorus chemicals in the water will mean that it will increase the level of summer eutrophication. So when the water becomes very green and smelly, and the oxygen level drops hugely, these eutrophication processes should be expected to the certain extent, but for sure it will depend on what exactly is in the water now.
Yeah, I mean, even a one-time and rapid drop of the water level in a huge reservoir undoubtedly leads to a dire ecological consequences. A huge number of fish dies, waterlogging, swamping, that's what you just tell us, of drained lands, and a possible change in the climate regime of the whole region. The water will flush away the entire layer of soil, exposing the sands. And what are we getting here is a new desert with all the obvious climatic consequences, such as a decrease in precipitation levels, dust storms, and a significant rise of annual temperatures in the region, and accordingly, the risk of drought in the fields of central and southern Ukraine rises. So that not only the downstream areas will be affected, but also those located upstreams of Dnipro River. Is that the case?
Yes, absolutely. You're absolutely right. So there are different stories upstream and downstream. And upstream, with this drop of water level, we see that the huge areas are now opened, which were previously covered with water. And these opened areas are with the dead fish, with the dead youngsters of fish, with water vegetation, and now it's just rotting, but later it will be dry, and the wind dust that the wind will bring dust up, and definitely such deserted areas will be not nice and affecting the people and the communities around. But the good story is that I'm pretty sure that in years, the years will be needed, but still the vegetation will cover these areas, and the ecosystem would be restored to a certain extent. There is a risk that the vegetation, the first vegetation, is expected to be invasive species. So those plants which are not local, not usual, but rather harmful for the ecosystem. And here in the ideal world, I believe that would be great to have people managing these areas, so eliminating these bad invasive plants and supporting the local vegetation to flourish.
Just a short question. Is anything can be done by science and with our human resource, with our biologists and chemists, and to help these lands revive faster?
Yes, just I mentioned, that's the help which is needed is to support recovery of the new opened areas at the shores of the Kakhovska Reservoir. Those shores which were previously covered with water, now they are open, and these areas management, that's what is needed. Unfortunately, we have the front line there, the occupied territories, and that's not so possible. But in the ideal world, that's what could be done there.
The Kakhovka hydroelectric power plant blow-up threatens the food security of the whole world. Is that the case?
Absolutely. As we discussed, drop of the water level in Kakhovka reservoir stopped the irrigation system in 3 oblasts of Ukraine. It's Khersonska, Dnipropetrovska, and Zaporizhzhia oblasts were supplied with water from this reservoir, and now it's not available anymore. So these are extremely agricultural areas, and the agricultural products, mainly used for export. Around 20% of the overall gross agricultural products are used inside Ukraine, and around 80 goes abroad. And I should say that the global food system is not sustainable. When African countries depend on the production rather far away, for example, in Ukraine, the production of food, and are not developing their own facilities, that's not a sustainable system. The more decentralized sources of food are developed, the better it for the world and each country. So it refers for Ukraine as well. I do wish that we not rely so much on agricultural export, but rather develop the added value industries, the brains.
Well, we have our nuclear plants then. The International Atomic Energy Agency is monitoring safety at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant after the explosion of the Kakhovska reservoir. Currently, there is no threat to nuclear safety at the station, says agency's official statement on its website. The blast of the Kakhovka power plant led to a significant drop in the level of the reservoir used to supply cooling water to Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. It should be noted that the absence of cooling water in the main water cooling systems for a prolonged period of time can lead to the melting of fuel and failure of emergency diesel generators. However, there is currently no immediate threat to the safety of the station. The head of the International Atomic Energy Agency notes that the cooled water is supplied from the tank and pumped through channels near the thermal power plant to the site. It's estimated that the water stock is sufficient for several days. Director General Rafael Grossi also said that there are several alternative sources of water for the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. The main one is a large cooling pond next to the area above the tank level. Since the reactors have been shut down for many months by now, it is assumed that this pond will be sufficient to provide cooling water for several months. It is therefore vital that this cooling pond remains intact, says Mr. Grossi. Nothing should be done to potentially undermine its integrity. Well, it sounds like an instruction for the Kremlin, to me, if you ask me. What now? Should we all be expecting that Russians will blow up this tank? Because they will obviously not stop at anything to blackmail the world. What is your opinion as an expert?
My opinion is that nuclear energy itself is extremely risky. It's risky and also associated with radioactive waste, which is unavoidable and unmanageable. And this situation with Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant is actually showing that all the risks of the huge energy source being located in a few buildings, which could be occupied, which could be threatened by military shooting or whatever with explosions, and potentially it's now used as a weapon, as a nuclear weapon located already on the territory. That's why I wish for Ukraine to slowly step out of nuclear energy, finalizing the lifetime of the existing one and switching to the renewables, energy efficiency, more clean technologies. And the Zaporizhzhia plant is the great example of all those unimaginable risks.
The main keyword I heard is slowly. I really like when scientists say slowly, because at the moment, the nuclear energy is the safest power source we have as a humankind. Because we're just breaking out. It is. I know it is really, really dangerous. But if you compare the number of catastrophes on nuclear power plants and catastrophe every day of burning the fossil fuel to ecology, then the fossil fuel plants are like 100 times more bad for ecology and for our future than the nuclear power plants, including all the damage it's done. But you suggest that Ukraine should slowly pause out, just walk out of the nuclear energy and come to renewable energy sources as it may be possible for the country after the war.
Yeah, absolutely. Slowing, phasing out from this, not building the new facilities, which are again creating the new, very dangerous objects, right, near the really crazy neighbor country. So I wish that this would be a slow, planned, and systematic process with the clear dates of phasing out, and this, because now most of the nuclear power stations are working beyond their normal lifetime. So it's time to close as soon as there is no the lifetime is over. So slowly, one by one, to plan this process and phase out and switch to renewables. Definitely, that's not an easy. It's not like you do it in one moment, but planning ahead, that's the key. And the more decentralized energy system is, the better it in terms of the possible risks. Now we see that these crazy neighbors are occupying Kakhovska power plant, and that's the huge source located in one area, Zaporizhia nuclear power plant, and when the huge energy sources located in a small area, that's the risk for the military operations.
Let me return again to the consequences of the possible consequences of the catastrophe at Zaporizhia nuclear power plant will be much worse than after the Chernobyl disaster, isn't it not? The area of the exclusion zone around the Zaporizhia NPP may be about 30,000 square kilometers. This is almost 10 times more than the Chernobyl had. The area of potentially contaminated territories may amount to 2 million square kilometers. That is, this is an unprecedentedly vast territory. For comparison, after the accident and the Chernobyl nuclear power plant, potentially contaminated territory spread to 200,000 square kilometers. Almost the entire territory of the Zaporizhia region may be uninhabitable for hundreds of years. About 1 million people might get radiation burns. In Chernobyl, there were 600,000 of them, and the death toll might be 10 times higher than Chernobyl's. A significant release of radioactive cesium-137 may occur, which will pose a risk to the health of citizens. The condition of water bodies and soils. This element is intensively absorbed by soil and bottom sediments and contaminates food. Radionuclide contamination will spread to the Dnipro, Black, and Azov seas. Why do those two keep their eyes open, have them wide shut? That is my question. Why the agency for atomic energy is not ringing all the bells, raising an international-wide alarm? They just watch and talk. Don't they understand the consequences to the world? Why is nothing being done?
My opinion is that because they are very much interested in the continuation of nuclear industry globally. They are the agency to manage nuclear industry, right? And as soon as nuclear facilities shows how dangerous they are losing credibility. So that's why they are trying to show that all is as calm and nice as possible, and nuclear power plant is safe and everything is fine. Not so much because of the Russian influence there, but rather because they are interested in showcasing that the nuclear energy is great, safe, green, fluffy, and the right way is, as I've already mentioned, the right way to be like phase out of nuclear energy in future, slowly, systematically, but not supporting it.
All right, I'm with you. So these guys are bad guys are like showcasing, like the atomic energy and nuclear power are not so safe, and you are just said that. But what about your fellow environmental organizations that were just same sluggish? I mean, they were all sitting down and watching. Nobody reacted in the same day even. They like in a couple of days, and let me tell you, the United Nations were literally tweeting their infamous tweet now at the moment, the Russian language day. Really? What are they for? Is that maybe the point where we have to change the whole United Nations Security Council at the moment was presided by Russia, which is mind-boggling. And your fellow environmental organizations were like shocked. What happened? What do we do? Nobody had a system. Nobody had the knowledge what to do. This is why I previously asked you about some rules like instructions of conduct for the people that left without fresh water. Nobody even, they did. I mean, it's a disaster inside the disaster. It is literally Russian matryoshka. That's what Russian aggressive war machine made in Ukraine. And we opened the next matryoshka doll. It's even disaster inside it, in there, planted. So what do we do with all these environmental organizations? What is your advice to make them work better?
I don't think that the environmental organizations' role is to fix something in the fields now. The role of such organizations is rather to influence policy making within the long-term planning and vision process. So I don't see a problem that they were not reacting, because so much quick response is the task of the rescue services or the services in the fields. And that's one part of the story. The second part is that the scope of the catastrophe is unique. There were never, ever such massive areas impacted so quick, and definitely this the task of the local services to react, and before they had to plan such consequences, how to deal with them, right? UN, you mentioned, definitely. This, for me, very similar to the League of Nations story that was already such kind of structures went through such stories before. And the bigger organizations are the slower processes and more bureaucratic processes are inside. So I never rely on quick response within the big international institutions. It's just not possible because of their size and slowliness.
Well, let me strongly disagree with you. I mean, disagree in what term? These international organizations, I'm not asking to turn back the hands of time. What I'm asking of these organizations is to react in time. The Russian language day, in the day where that catastrophe happened.
Yeah, they showed their face, let's say.
Yeah, exactly.
That's true, I agree here.
But let's change their faces then, because I don't want these faces to look at them anymore. What about your organization? Did it react? Did it respond in time? What did it do after that happened?
Organization I'm working with don't have their office in Ukraine or the staff here, except of me actually, and one of my colleagues. And we're working via partners. So we are supporting partner organizations which are working in the fields and cooperated previously with the few organizations supporting them with funding so that they are better equipped, they are better disaster, supported with vehicles, with facilities to do such rescue operations. And so we were rather working for make them more prepared for disasters. And when such disaster happens, just it's time for us to have lessons learned, to understand what's working, what's not.
Well, it is good to hear that, at least. The Prime Minister of Ukraine, Denis Shmyhal, appealed to the leadership of the United Nations, the International Committee of the Red Cross, and other international humanitarian organizations regarding the Russian troops' detonation of the Kakhovska HPP Dam.
Dear Secretary General Guterres, Honorable Mr. Deputy Secretary General Griffiths, respected heads of United Nations agencies, President of the International Committee of the Red Cross, Madame Spolyarich, distinguished leaders of international humanitarian organizations. Last night, Russian forces destroyed the dam of the Kakhovka hydroelectric power plant. This horrifying act of terror has resulted in a massive ecological and humanitarian catastrophe. Dozens of settlements have been already flooded by water. The Ukrainian government has organized the evacuation from the territory of Kherson Oblast under our control. However, on the left bank, in the temporarily occupied area, people have been abandoned by the Russians. 10 settlements have been flooded there, and hundreds of homes have vanished beneath the water. People who stayed there are forced to leave their homes on their own, while those unable to do so find themselves trapped in the face of this disaster. The Russian occupiers don't even make an effort to help these people. They have left them to perish. International humanitarian organizations, on behalf of the government of Ukraine, I urge you, you must act immediately. We appeal to you to take charge of evacuating people from the territories of Kherson Oblast occupied by Russia. We must save the lives of these people whom the occupiers have condemned to death. We must act now.
I have only one simple question. After that said by Mr. Shmyhal, several days passed, and these organizations were what? I mean, are you telling me that they were shocked with the scale of the event, and they were not sitting? What happened?
They're just unable to do. That's the lack of capacity. This organization is usually are fundraising a lot of funds from different sources and streaming them into the huge projects. I don't know. My opinion is that such structures as UN agencies, United Nations Development Agency, for example, is in Ukraine, having huge sources, being so ineffectively slow, and that's not the way how they such like public funds or like other funds, but for non-profit purposes should be used. That's I absolutely agree with you that the situation is really dramatic, and lack of response from international organizations which have to be there now. That's the time really to.
This is a sign of a time, I think. This is the sign of the time, and it shows that we need to change the enemy inside our own system, which is that sluggish reaction of high officials that are sitting in their chairs and thinking that, well, we in Ukraine paying with our blood, we spill with our blood, literally, not my blood. He's sitting here in this comfortable studio in Kiev, but anyway, the Kiev is shelled, just by the way, so you probably know that too, quite well. So, but people are dying here in Ukraine every day. And the immediate reaction is what we require. We're not asking it. We require it because we are living on the same planet. And this is the catastrophe of the planetary scale. And we will learn the damage it done only with years upcoming, as we just discussed. And these organizations are just sitting and doing nothing and all. Oh, for fuck's sake, it's crazy. And like 7 days or 5 days pass until these guys are just say, oh, the Russian language is important. Every language is important. But the carriers, the native speakers of this language, conduct a massive ecocide against the human kind right now. And you are even unable to tweet it. What kind of an organization is that?
May I comment here?
Yes, please do. I'm sorry, of course.
Yeah. So I totally agree that these situations showing their ineffectiveness, and I truly believe that the future is behind decentralization. Ukrainians actually showed, starting from Maidan and previous revolutions, that self-organization within small entities, that's the key to changing societies. That's the key to response.
Absolutely.
That's the key how Kiev, battle for Kiev was won, actually, because of this self-organization and ability to react in such unimaginable situation. The same for such institutions. I wish that such huge institutions stop receiving public money, stop being funded, but rather these sources switch into the smaller entities. The same as the small farming is the better solution than agriculture. Small decentralized energy sources is better than the huge nuclear power plants. The same is with the reaction to the humanitarian catastrophes.
Well, absolutely. I'm with you, and I agree with you. And what a beautiful, lovely example you just made. That said, the Kiev was defended by people. By people living here in Kiev. And I've seen that because I'm here from the second week of the war.
World War?
No, sorry, I'm on the second week of the war. So let's do that. Let's make this change in United Nations organizations that should be responsible for being that sluggish. But if for some reason we would have looked into almost any parts of the history of humankind, we would have clearly seen that we have not been using much of our own intellect back in the days. Obviously, we are not using it still. Maybe it is because we don't have much of it after all, at least don't have enough. And maybe this is why we have created artificial intelligence. Time to ask Deus ex machina. Our question to ChatGPT is, what should be the punishment for the state and its leader for committing an ecocide? Here is what AI, famous ChatGPT, has answered. The concept of ecocide refers to the extensive damage or destruction of ecosystems, often as a result of human activities. As of my knowledge cut off in September 2022, there is no universally accepted international crime of ecocide. However, there have been discussions and proposals to include it as a fifth crime alongside genocide, crimes against humanity, war crimes, and aggression in the jurisdiction of the International Criminal Court, ICC. If ecocide were to be recognized as an international crime and incorporated into legal systems, determining the appropriate punishment would depend on the legal framework established. Generally, punishments for crimes are determined based on the severity of the offense, the intention behind it, and the specific circumstances. It would be up to lawmakers, legal experts, and international bodies to establish appropriate penalties for ecocide. Possible punishments could include fines, imprisonment, community service, restitution for environmental damages, or combination of these measures. Additionally, remedies might involve requiring the state and its leaders to undertake significant environmental restoration efforts or adopt sustainable practices to mitigate the damage caused. It is worth noting that laws and regulations regarding ecocide can vary among countries, and different legal systems may have their own mechanisms for addressing environmental offenses. Therefore, it will be important to consult the specific laws and regulations of a given jurisdiction to understand the applicable punishments for ecocide, if they exist. Do you agree to our mutual advisor? Do you think that ecocide should be joined in this, four horsemen of apocalypse? This is the crime of aggression, the genocide, and the crime of unprovoked aggression, Is this the fifth
absolutely.
element? Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. This is, I totally agree that ecocide should be recognized internationally, that history has such cases, the really dramatic cases, and in line, for me, it's very close to the crimes against humanity, because normally, or unfortunately, when such massive impacts on the environment happens, it's not only impact on the environment, it's impact on humans. So very, very close and interlinked these terms, and definitely these should be recognized, because sometimes it's not so obvious. And when we talk about ecocide, it's also about future. It's about the future generations which would feel the consequences and results. And I'm really disappointed that in the most environmentally friendly, let's say, best case legislation countries, like European countries, this is not the case. I wish this the war, Russian-Ukrainian war, will change this case.
At least it shows that the system, the whole international system of politics, is not ready for what is going on. We simply don't know what to do. This is why this is why sometimes we just do not act. And talking about an intellect, I'm not too surprised about how how safe the Russians feel in regards to the possible catastrophes that their war they started can lead to. After all, these are the same people who dug trenches in the so-called Red Forest near Chernobyl, where the soil was and is still emitting loads of radiation. All who were digging were exposed to overdose of radiation, and that just might lead to long and painful death. But who cares, right? No one, the Kremlin, does that, is for sure. In this video, released by Ukrainian media on April 6, 2022, you're looking at the Russian military dug trenches 4 kilometers from the Chernobyl nuclear power plant, in that red forest that I just mentioned. For more than a month of occupation of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant and its exclusion zone, the Kremlin held its soldiers in the violently dangerous place in terms of radiation. In 1986, most of the radioactive dust fell out in this area, and in 2020, the forest was almost completely burned in large-scale wildfires. Over the past year and a half, the radioactive dust has settled by now, but I won't recommend it to anyone to enter this territory, let alone digging the ground there, lifting all this radioactive dust into the air. We do not know exactly for sure when the Russian military began to entrench in this dreadful place. However, we know that they entered the exclusion zone and the Chernobyl ZNPP on February 24th. In the picture taken from the satellite on February 26th, the camp in the Red Forest is just not yet there. This camp, although not very clearly, can already be seen in the photo made on March 16th. Other satellite images taken on March 28 and 29, respectively, show fires near the camp that housed Russian soldiers. According to the nature of these fires, it very much looks like Russians are burning dry grass. I mean dry grass stuffed with cesium-137. And they continue doing that, judging by March 29 satellite images taken the day after the fire, and further, the trees and grass in and around the camp were almost completely burned. But we talked about the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant and the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. One has already brought a lot of grief and damage and catastrophe. The other can bring way more than that. In terms of ecology, is the whole concept of nuclear power so that wrong? You say that we have to just abandon the nuclear energy source at all as a humanity. Is that so?
Yes, I'm pretty sure that we should step out, phase out from nuclear energy slowly, step by step, and changing it for the more clean, renewable energy sources, and increasing energy efficiency in all the sectors of economy. I'm absolutely sure. The catastrophes already in place, and potential catastrophes which are now used as a political tool view as a way to threaten the world, that's not the way as it should be. I totally agree with that.
Let me agree with you on that, dear Natalia. Thank you very much for your expertise. Thank you very much for your time. I hope to see you soon with us, with The Gaze, for finding the information and for finding the themes that are more pleasant to discuss than the catastrophe that we just discussed today. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. See you.
See you soon. Take care. Now that will be all, folks. Thank you very much for your time and for being with us. I'm Henry Keane and it was my show Talk for More at a new digital platform of New Europe directly from Ukraine. Join The Gaze online and feed your thirst for truth and adventure into the realm of international news and politics. Take care and see you very soon.